She was just the maid. It's what everyone called her in the big house where she worked. No one knew much about her. She didn't talk a lot, and she always kept her head down. Every morning she came in quietly through the back door, tied her apron, and started cleaning. She scrubbed the floors, wiped down the windows, polished the silver, and did laundry without complaint. She moved through the halls like a shadow, always there, but barely noticed. The family that owned the house was rich. Their house had high ceilings, tall glass windows, and rooms filled with expensive furniture. A big grand piano stood in the corner of the living room, shining under the chandelier light. But no one in the family really played it. It was just decoration, something to impress guests. The maid dusted the piano every week. She ran a soft cloth across the keys, careful not to press them. Sometimes she paused just for a second, her fingers hovering above the keys like they remembered something. But she never played. She didn't dare. This wasn't her house. She was only the maid. The people she worked for rarely looked at her. The kids in the house sometimes made fun of her, whispering behind her back or laughing when she walked by. The parents didn't bother to learn her full name. To them, she was just the help, but she never let it show. She kept her face calm and her voice polite. If she ever felt hurt or tired, she hid it well. She had gotten used to being invisible, but if someone had watched her closely, they might have seen something. In the quiet moments when the family was out and the house was silent, she moved differently. She didn't clean like a person. With no dreams, she cleaned like someone who had lived another life, like someone who had once known music, art, beauty, like someone who had lost something. She lived in a small room at the back of the house, next to the laundry area. The room had a narrow bed, a small table, and a suitcase tucked under it. On the table was a photo frame turned face down. No one ever saw her look at it, but she dusted it gently every night before sleeping. No one asked her where she came from. No one cared. But she had a story, a whole world inside her that no one knew. She hadn't always been a maid. A time when she sat in front of grand pianos, not to clean them, but to play. A time when people clapped for her, when music flowed from her fingers like it was part of her soul. But that was before everything changed. Life had not been kind. Things fell apart back home. Sudden loss, debts, and responsibilities pushed her into survival mode. Her dreams had to be buried. There was no time for music when there were bills to pay and mouths to feed. So she packed her old life away like clothes in a suitcase and came to the city. Work was work, and the job she found was cleaning rich people's houses. But even though her hands now scrubbed floors instead of playing piano keys, the music never fully left her. It lived quietly inside her, like a song waiting to be heard again. She never told anyone, not the other maids, not the cook, not the family. It didn't matter. No one would believe her anyway. She was just the maid. It's all they saw. But life is strange. Sometimes, in the most unexpected moment, the world shifts. And the people you overlook, the ones in the background, suddenly step into the light. She didn't know it yet, but her moment was coming. Very soon. And when it came, it would begin with a joke. A prank. A cruel little game by people who thought they were better. But one note would be enough to silence them all. It was a Saturday. The evening, and the mansion buzzed with excitement. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Guests in shiny clothes walked in, laughing, holding drinks, and smiling wide for photos. The family was throwing a grand party for their relatives and some important business friends. Everything had to be perfect. The food, the music, the decorations, nothing could go wrong. The maid worked quietly behind the scenes. She helped the cook in the kitchen, carried trays to the dining area, and made sure everything stayed clean and in order. She wore her usual plain uniform. No one noticed her. Not really. She was like the furniture present, but ignored. In the large living room, teenagers gathered around, dressed in fancy outfits. They scrolled through their phones, took selfies, and gossiped loudly. One of them leaned on the piano and laughed, saying, "This thing is just here to show off. No one even knows how to play it." Another teen smirked and looked toward the maid who was quietly dusting a table near the corner.
Ask her to play.
Imagine how funny that would be. She probably doesn't even know what a piano is. The others giggled. The idea wasn't kind, but in their minds, it was just a harmless joke. They whispered and agreed it would be entertaining. The maid didn't notice them at first. She was focused on her task. But soon, she heard them calling her. She looked up, confused. One of the teens spoke with fake sweetness. "Hey, would you play something for us on the piano?" The maid blinked, unsure if they were serious. She looked around and saw the others smiling strangely, some even covering their mouths. To hide their giggles, she knew it wasn't a real request. It was a setup, a joke for their amusement. She shook her head gently. "No, I can't." But they didn't stop. "Come on, just one little tune." "Don't be shy," another one said, clapping their hands. Like it was a fun game. The adults nearby were busy chatting and laughing. No one seemed to notice or care. The maid hesitated. Her heart beat faster. She didn't want to be part of their joke. She wanted to disappear. But their voices grew louder, and a few guests began watching. Someone said, "Let her play. What's the harm?" Feeling trapped and embarrassed, she slowly walked toward the piano. Her steps were small, quiet, and heavy. Inside, she felt nervous and sad. It wasn't that she didn't know how to play it, it was that they didn't believe she could. Were not asking because they respected her. They just wanted to laugh. She sat down at the grand piano. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed them on the cold, smooth keys. The teens leaned forward, waiting for something funny to happen. They expected her to press random notes, to mess up, to look foolish. The maid took a deep breath. Her eyes looked down at the keys, but her mind drifted far away to another time, another place. A small music school. A younger version of herself. And the sound of music flowing through the air like magic. She closed her eyes. Everything went quiet. The giggles stopped. The air in the room felt still, almost heavy. Then she pressed the first key, just one note, and in that single sound, something shifted. The laughter died. The mocking smiles faded. What they heard wasn't noise. It wasn't a joke. It was something else. Something beautiful. They didn't know it yet. But the prank was over before it even started. What came next would leave the whole room silent and change everything they thought they knew about the woman they only saw as the maid. As the maid sat at the grand piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys, a strange silence spread through the room. People who had been laughing now stared, waiting for something silly to happen. Some still expected her to press random notes and make a fool of herself. Others just looked curious. No one expected anything special, but the maid didn't move right away. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and stayed still. Her hands looked calm, but inside her heart was pounding. She could feel everyone watching. She could feel the judgment in their eyes. Not one of them believed in her. For a moment she thought about getting up and walking away. But then something deep inside her spoke quiet but strong. It reminded her of the girl she used to be. The girl who used to play music not for fame or money, but because it brought her peace. It reminded her that she didn't need their approval to play. She just needed to be herself. And then she pressed the first note. The sound was soft, but it filled the room. It was not loud, but it had something inside it, emotion. Her fingers moved gently like they knew exactly where to go. She began to play slowly, carefully, as if she were opening a door that had been locked for years. The melody was simple at first, but beautiful. It sounded like a memory. Like the kind of music that makes you stop and feel something without even knowing why. It was a tune no one had ever heard before, yet it felt familiar to everyone listening. People stopped talking. Even those who weren't paying attention turned their heads toward the sound. The teens who had made the prank sat quietly, their eyes wide. The smirks on their faces faded. They were hearing something they had not expected, something real. Maid's hands moved with grace. Her back was straight, her face calm. There was no fear in her now. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove a point. She was simply letting the music speak. And the music was speaking loud and clear. It told a story of pain, of dreams lost, of quiet strength. It spoke of early mornings and lonely nights, of a girl who once had hope, who once had talent and who had been forced to hide it to survive. Every note was like a piece of her heart being shared with the room, and they felt it. Some of the adults stood still, their drinks forgotten in their hands. One woman covered her mouth softly, tears filling her eyes. Even the children sat silently, their phones down, completely focused on the music. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. It felt like a gift. When the song slowly came to an end, the last note floated in the air for a moment before fading. The room stayed quiet. No one moved. No one clapped at first, not because they didn't want to, but because they were still in shock. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap, then more and more, until the room was full of real, loud, respectful applause. It's not the fake kind they gave out of politeness. This was the kind of clapping that came from the heart. The kind people give when they know they've just witnessed something special. The maid stood up quietly and gave a small bow, unsure of what to say or do. She had only played because they asked. She didn't expect any praise. She didn't expect anything at all. But in that moment, something had changed. The people in the room didn't see just a maid anymore. They saw a musician. They saw a person, and some of them, deep down, also saw their own shame for ever thinking she was less than them. After the music ended and the clapping slowed, silence returned to the room. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This time it was filled with respect. Everyone was still looking at the maid, but their eyes had changed. They no longer saw her as just the quiet woman who cleaned the house. Something had shifted. The teenagers who had pushed her into playing were now quiet. They looked at each other awkwardly, not sure what to say. A few of them looked down at the floor. Others kept glancing at the piano, as if trying to understand how someone like her, someone they had teased, could play like that. One of the older guests stepped forward. He was a businessman who had known the family for years.
That was
unbelievable, he said softly. Where did you learn to play like that? The maid looked down and gave a small smile. She wasn't used to being asked questions in this way. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a calm voice, she said, I used to study music. A long time ago, a woman nearby raised her eyebrows. Study? Like at a school? The maid nodded. Yes, I went to a music school in my home country. I used to dream of becoming a pianist, but life doesn't always follow our plans. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held a quiet sadness. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or ask for pity. And the truth hit people harder than any performance ever could. Another guest asked what happened. The maid looked around the room. Everyone was listening. Now not because they had to, but because they wanted to. My father died when I was still a student, she said. We lost everything. I had to stop studying and work to support my family. I took any job I could. When I came here, I found work as a maid. It paid enough to send money back home. No one spoke for a moment. All those years of talent, of hard work and training, hidden behind daily chores. All those dreams folded away, like the bedsheets she washed every morning. The family who owned the house stood at the side, watching. Looked uncomfortable. Not because she had done anything wrong, because they suddenly realized how little they knew about the person who had worked in their home for years. They had never asked, never cared to ask. The youngest child in the family tugged at their parents' sleeve and whispered, She's better than the man who played at my music class. Someone from the crowd stepped closer. He was a quiet man with glasses who had been silent all night, cleared his throat and said, I work at the music academy in town. If you're willing, I could speak to the director. You shouldn't. Be hidden away. The maid's eyes widened slightly. I don't know if I can still keep up with trained musicians. It's been a long time. He smiled kindly. Talent like that doesn't fade. You just proved that. Another guest offered to help too. I run a small concert space. Maybe we could plan a small event, just local. Let people hear you. The room, once full of shallow laughter and fake smiles, now felt completely different. It was filled with something real: respect, kindness, and a sense of guilt too. People began to realize how easy it was to judge someone by their job, their clothes, or their silence. The maid stood quietly, unsure of how to respond to all this attention. She hadn't played for praise. She had played because, for the first time in a long while, someone asked her to. When she touched the keys, her heart did the rest. That night had started with a prank. A cruel joke meant to make her feel small. But now, the only thing that felt small was the way they had seen her before. After the guests left and the house became quiet again, the maid returned to her small room in the back of the house. On her bed, still wearing her work clothes, still unsure how to feel. Everything had happened so fast.
One moment.
They were laughing at her. The next, they were offering to help her chase a dream she had buried years ago. She looked down at her. Hands, the same hands that had been scrubbing floors and washing dishes for so long. But tonight, those same hands had made music. Real music. For a few minutes, she hadn't been just a maid. She had been something more, something she used to be, something she still could be. Her heart felt heavy and light at the same time. That was confusing. She didn't know if she should cry or smile. The music professor's words kept playing in her mind. Talent like that doesn't fade. And the man who offered his concert space, could this really lead to something? She wasn't used to hope. For so long, life had been about surviving, not dreaming. She had learned to expect very little. That way nothing could hurt her. Now, a tiny seed of hope had been planted. No matter how hard she tried to stay calm, it kept growing inside her. The next morning, the family was more quiet than usual. They didn't speak much during breakfast. For the first time, they looked at her differently, not as a background figure, but as a person. The mother gave her a polite smile. The father nodded and said good morning softly, which had never happened before. Even the children were quiet, not out of fear, but out of respect. Later that day, someone knocked at the back door. It was the man from the party, the one from the music academy. He had come like he promised. I spoke to the director, he said. They want to meet you. Just an informal chat, no pressure. The maid didn't know what to say. She was nervous, unsure if she belonged in such a place anymore. I haven't practiced in years, she said quietly. He smiled. Then it's time to start again. The family gave her permission to take the afternoon off. They didn't question her. They just watched as she walked out the door, holding her coat and a small notebook that she used to write music in. Long ago, at the music academy, she sat down with the director and a few staff members. They didn't ask for her resume or her past job titles. They just asked her to play. She sat in front of a grand piano again this time, not as a maid, but as a guest. She played the same piece she had played at the party, only this time, she played it slower, with more feeling, like she was talking to the piano itself. When she finished, the room was silent again. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they were moved. The director leaned forward. Would you consider joining our evening classes? We can help you brush up. There's no fee. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. Yes, I would like that. Walking home that evening, the sky looked a little more blue. The air felt a little lighter, for the first time. In many years, she felt like she was walking toward something, not just running away from problems. It was strange how life worked. A prank had opened the door. A joke meant to embarrass her had led her back to her true self. She wasn't sure where this new path would take her. But one thing was clear. She was no longer just the maid. She was a woman with music in her soul, and now the world was finally listening. Evening classes at the music academy became the best part of her week. After finishing her work at the mansion, she would change into clean clothes, take her small music notebook, and walk quietly to the academy. It didn't matter how tired she was or how long her day had been. The moment she stepped into that building, she felt alive again. At first she was nervous. The other students were younger, full of energy and confidence. They had fresh training, while she had only old memories. But when she sat at the piano, everything felt natural. Her fingers remembered what her mind had almost forgotten. The teachers noticed it too. They didn't treat her like someone starting over. They treated her like someone coming home. She practiced with dedication. Late at night after work, when the house was quiet, She would sit on the edge of her bed and play imaginary keys on her lap. During breaks, she would write new melodies. In her notebook, short, sweet pieces that came straight from her heart. The family she worked for began to see the change in her. She smiled more often now. She moved with a quiet confidence. The children sometimes peeked around the corner when she hummed softly while cleaning. They didn't laugh anymore. They just listened. One evening, the father of the house sat at the dining table and called her over. She felt surprised. He had never invited her to speak unless it was about work. He cleared his throat and said, "We heard about your progress at the music academy. The professor who visited last time stopped by again. He told us you're doing well." She nodded. Unsure where the conversation was going, he looked at her for a long moment. "We didn't know about your talent, about your past. We should have paid more attention." She didn't know what to say. She had never expected an apology. She had never even thought she'd hear kind words from him. "We'd like to help you," he added. "If you ever decide to take it further performing, recording, we want to support you." She was silent for a few seconds, then softly said, "Thank you, that means a lot." But she didn't want charity. What she wanted was a chance. A real chance to show who she was, not just to others, but to herself. Weeks passed. Her skill grew sharper. Her confidence grew stronger. Then, one day, her music teacher at the academy gave her a new suggestion. "There's a small concert happening next month," he said. "Just local people, students, families, a few music lovers. I think you should perform." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't performed in front of strangers in years. The last time she had been a teenager. But now she wasn't. A girl with big dreams, she was a woman who had lived through pain, sacrifice. And Silent Sand had found her voice again. She hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "I'll do it." The following days were filled with preparation. She practiced the same piece she had played during the party, but this time she made it even better. She added parts of her own, telling her own story through the music. Was no longer just a song, it was her journey turned into sound. She didn't tell many people about the concert. She didn't expect anyone from the mansion to show up. But when the day came and she stepped onto the small stage, her eyes scanned. The audience, in the third row, she saw them, the family she worked for. Sitting quietly, watching her with serious faces. Even the children were there, dressed neatly and sitting still. The lights dimmed. She took a deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys. This time, there were no jokes, no giggles, no shame, only music, and a woman reclaiming the dream that never truly left her. The lights in the small hall dimmed. All eyes were on her as she sat at the piano, the same piano she had touched with fear the night they played a prank on her. But now there was no fear, no pressure, just her, the keys, and the story she was ready to share. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first note was soft but full of feeling. Then the melody flowed, gentle and rich, like a quiet stream after a long rain. Every note told a part of her life. The struggle, the sadness, the strength, the years she spent hiding her talent, the lonely nights when music only lived inside her heart. The silent pain of being seen as just the maid. But also the hope, the return of something she thought was lost forever. The room stayed still. No one moved. Even the smallest sounds in the hall disappeared. It felt like time had stopped. Her music didn't need words. It spoke to everyone in its own way. Some people closed their eyes and listened deeply. Others sat with tears in their eyes, moved by something they didn't fully understand. In the third row, the family who had once overlooked her sat quietly. They didn't clap early. They didn't whisper. They just watched. Their expressions were different, now not proud, not guilty, but respectful. They were finally seeing her, truly seeing her. Not as someone who worked in the background, but as someone who had a rare and beautiful gift. As her piece came to an end, she held the last note for just a second longer, then lifted her hands gently off the keys. The sound faded like the final page of a story being turned. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, one clap, then another, and then the whole room stood up, giving her a long, warm round of applause. No one was clapping just because others were. Every person in that hall was touched. She stood, gave a soft bow, and looked out at the crowd. She saw smiles, teary eyes, and kind faces. She had feared this moment for so long. But now that it was here, she felt free, not nervous, not shy. Free. After the concert, many people came to talk to her. Some asked where she had trained. Others simply thanked her for the music. A few told her it reminded them of home, of lost loved ones, or of something beautiful they couldn't put into words. But one person stood quietly to the side. The music professor who had first seen her potential. "You didn't just play music. Tonight," he said softly, "you've reminded people that every person has a story. Sometimes the quietest ones carry the deepest songs." She smiled, tears in her eyes, but not falling. "Thank you for believing in me," he nodded. It was never about belief. It was about seeing what was already there. Over the next few months, her life changed slowly but surely. She continued her work at the mansion, but now with more freedom and time to focus on music. She started giving piano lessons on weekends. People invited her to perform at small events. Her name began to spread, not as a maid, but as a musician. With a story, but she never forgot who she was or where she came from. She didn't chase fame. She stayed humble. She helped others who felt unseen, who had talent but no voice, because she knew what it felt like to be invisible. And she also knew what it felt like to be heard. Her journey wasn't about becoming rich or famous. It was about remembering herself. And because of one cruel prank that turned into an unexpected chance, she found her way back to the music. And the world found its way to her.